On the morning of March 17, 1983, Major Viktor Petrov sat alone in his office at the GRU headquarters in Moscow, holding a telegram that should never have crossed his desk. The paper was thin, almost translucent under the pale light coming through the frost-covered window. His hands did not shake. His breath remained steady. But something inside him had already begun to crack. The telegram was coded, as all sensitive communications were. It had been intercepted 3 days earlier by Signals Intelligence in East Berlin, part of a routine sweep of American diplomatic channels. The decryption team had flagged it for review because it mentioned a name they recognized from previous surveillance files. The name was not remarkable on its own. What made Viktor's chest tighten was that the name belonged to his wife. He read the line again. Agent Nightingale requests updated contact protocol. The word Nightingale meant nothing to most people. To Viktor, it was the nickname he had whispered to his wife on their wedding night. 14 years ago, when she told him she used to sing in the church choir before the state closed it down. He had never told anyone else. She swore she hadn't either. Viktor placed the telegram face down on his desk and stared at the gray wall in front of him. Outside, the streets of Moscow were covered in late winter snow. People moved through their lives with the practiced efficiency of those who had learned not to ask questions. The Soviet Union was vast, powerful, and unforgiving. It rewarded loyalty and crushed doubt. Viktor had spent his entire adult life serving it. He believed in the mission. He believed in the necessity of sacrifice. And now, sitting in that cold office with a piece of paper that could destroy everything, he realized how little belief mattered when it collided with the truth. His wife's name was Anna. She was 36 years old, a translator at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, specializing in English and French. She had been vetted twice before their marriage, as was standard for anyone marrying a military intelligence officer. Both reports came back clean. She had no foreign contacts, no suspicious travel history, no ideological deviations. She was, by every official measure, a model Soviet citizen. Viktor had met her at a state function in 1969. She was translating for a delegation of visiting French academics. He had been assigned to observe the event, looking for signs of Western influence or ideological contamination. Instead, he noticed the way she corrected a mistranslation with quiet confidence, the way she stood straight without appearing rigid. After the event, he asked a colleague for her name. 6 months later, they were married in a civil ceremony with 12 people in attendance. Their life together had been ordinary in all the ways that mattered to the state. They lived in a modest apartment near Gorky Park. They did not complain. They did not associate with dissidents. Anna translated technical manuals and diplomatic correspondence. Viktor analyzed intelligence reports and briefed senior officers on NATO movements. They attended the occasional ballet. They visited Viktor's mother in Tula once a year. They did not have children, though neither of them spoke openly about why. Now Viktor sat with a telegram that suggested his wife had been living a parallel life, one he had never suspected. The Americans did not use code names casually. Nightingale was not a placeholder. It was an operational designation, assigned to someone who had provided valuable intelligence over time. The request for updated contact protocol meant the relationship was ongoing. It meant Anna was still active. Viktor did not move for a long time. He could hear footsteps in the hallway outside his office, the low murmur of voices discussing logistics for an upcoming operation in Afghanistan. The world continued around him, indifferent to the quiet apocalypse unfolding inside his mind. He thought about the previous night when Anna had asked him how his day went. He had said it was routine. She had smiled and served him tea. The memory felt contaminated now, every gesture suddenly suspicious, every silence a possible lie. The rational part of his mind, the part trained to analyze intelligence without emotion, began constructing possibilities. Perhaps the telegram was a mistake. Perhaps there was another Anna, another Nightingale, and the overlap was coincidental. Perhaps the Americans were running a false flag operation, trying to sow distrust within Soviet ranks by planting fake intercepts. It was a known tactic. It had been used before, but the rational part of his mind was losing ground to something darker and more corrosive. Viktor had spent years reading intelligence reports about betrayal. He knew how these things worked. The pattern was always the same. The spouse seemed normal. The routine never changed. And then one day a name appeared in a file, and the entire structure of a life collapsed. He had seen it happen to colleagues. He had even participated in the investigations, watching from behind one-way glass as loyal officers were confronted with evidence of their partner's treason. He remembered the look on their faces, the disbelief, the desperate search for an explanation that would make the world make sense again. Now he was the one sitting in that room, holding the evidence, feeling the ground dissolve beneath him. Viktor folded the telegram and placed it in the inner pocket of his uniform jacket. He stood, straightened his tie, and walked out of his office. The hallway was quiet. He passed two junior officers who saluted as he went by. He returned the gesture automatically, his face composed, his stride measured. No one could see the war taking place inside him. He left the building and walked to his car, a dark blue Lada that the state had assigned to him 3 years earlier. The engine turned over reluctantly in the cold. He sat behind the wheel, staring through the windshield at the gray facade of the headquarters building. Steam rose from a ventilation shaft on the roof. Somewhere inside, analysts were processing the day's intelligence, typing reports, filing documents, making decisions that would ripple outward into the lives of people who would never know they had been noticed. Viktor drove home slowly, navigating the streets with the mechanical precision of someone whose mind was elsewhere. He tried to remember the last time Anna had seemed nervous, distracted, or evasive. He could not think of a single instance. She had always been calm, attentive, present. If she was living a double life, she was doing it with a discipline that rivaled his own. The apartment building where they lived was a concrete block constructed in the 1960s, identical to 1,000 others across the city. Viktor parked in the small lot behind the building and climbed the stairs to the 4th floor. The hallway smelled like cabbage and cigarette smoke. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. Anna was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She looked up when he entered and smiled. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. She wore a simple dress and an apron. The radio on the counter was playing a broadcast about agricultural production in Ukraine. "You're home early," she said. Viktor set his briefcase down by the door and removed his coat. "They sent me to review some files. I finished faster than expected." "Good. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. He watched her move around the kitchen, slicing vegetables with practiced efficiency. She hummed softly to herself, a melody he recognized but could not name. Everything about the scene was normal. Everything about it felt like a performance. "How was your day?" he asked. "Busy. I spent most of it translating a technical manual about grain storage systems. Incredibly dull, but someone has to do it." "Anyone interesting at the ministry?" She glanced at him, a faint smile on her lips. "Define interesting." "Bureaucrats are bureaucrats, Viktor. You know that." He nodded and walked into the living room. The apartment was small but tidy. A bookshelf lined one wall, filled with Russian classics and a few foreign novels that had been approved for circulation. A photograph of Viktor's parents sat on a side table next to a ceramic vase Anna had bought at a market in Leningrad. Everything was in its place. Everything was as it should be. Viktor sat on the couch and closed his eyes. He could hear Anna moving in the kitchen, the sound of water running, the clink of dishes. He thought about the telegram in his jacket pocket, the name Nightingale, the request for updated contact protocol. He thought about the years they had spent together, the quiet routines, the unspoken compromises. He thought about loyalty and what it meant when the person you trusted most was the person you could no longer believe. That night after dinner, they sat together and watched television. The state broadcast showed a documentary about Soviet achievements in space exploration. Anna leaned against his shoulder, her hand resting on his arm. Viktor kept his eyes on the screen, watching cosmonauts float in zero gravity, untethered and alone. The next morning, Viktor returned to his office and requested Anna's security file. It was a routine action, something that would not raise suspicion. Officers occasionally reviewed the files of their family members, especially when clearances were up for renewal. The clerk in the records department brought him a thin folder and left without comment. Viktor opened the file and read through it carefully. The initial vetting report from 1969 was thorough. Anna's background had been checked meticulously. She was born in Minsk in 1947. Her father had been a factory worker who died in an industrial accident when she was 12. Her mother had worked as a schoolteacher until her death from cancer in 1965. Anna had studied languages at Moscow State University, graduating with honors in 1968. She had no siblings. She had no criminal record. She had no known associations with dissidents or foreign nationals. The second vetting report, completed in 1975, was similarly unremarkable. Anna had been promoted within the ministry. Her work was described as competent and reliable. She attended state functions when required. She had no foreign travel. She had no unexplained income. She was, according to every official measure, exactly what she appeared to be. Viktor closed the file and sat back in his chair. If Anna was working for the Americans, she had been doing it with extraordinary care. There were no gaps in her record, no inconsistencies, no red flags. Either she was innocent, or she was one of the most disciplined operatives he had ever encountered. He spent the rest of the day trying to focus on his regular duties, but his mind kept returning to the telegram. Agent Nightingale requests updated contact protocol. The phrase repeated itself like a prayer he could not stop saying. He thought about confronting Anna directly, asking her to explain. But he knew that would accomplish nothing. If she was guilty, she would deny it. If she was innocent, she would be hurt and confused. Either way, the question would remain unanswered. Instead, Viktor decided to watch. He would observe her as he had been trained to observe targets. He would look for patterns, deviations, signs of stress or deception. He would become a stranger in his own home, studying his wife the way he studied intelligence reports from enemy agents. The surveillance began that evening. Viktor came home at his usual time and acted as though nothing had changed. He asked about her day. She told him about a meeting at the ministry, a minor dispute over translation accuracy, a colleague who had brought pastries to share. Viktor listened and nodded and searched her face for any sign of discomfort. He found none. Over the following days, he began to notice small things he had overlooked before. Anna made phone calls from the kitchen, always keeping her voice low. She said they were work-related, conversations with other translators about deadlines and terminology. Viktor had no reason to doubt her, but now he wondered. She went to the market every Saturday morning, always alone. She said she preferred to shop by herself, that it gave her time to think. Viktor had never questioned it. Now he imagined her passing messages in the crowd, slipping envelopes into bags of vegetables, making contact with handlers who looked like ordinary shoppers. She kept a small box in the back of the bedroom closet, filled with letters and photographs from her childhood. Viktor had seen it once, years ago, but had never examined it closely. Now he wondered if there was something hidden inside, something she had kept from him. One evening, while Anna was in the bathroom, Viktor opened the closet and pulled out the box. His hands moved quickly, his ears attuned to the sound of running water in the other room. The box contained what she had always said it did: letters from her mother. A few photographs of her father, a pressed flower from a trip to the countryside. Nothing incriminating, nothing suspicious. He was about to close the box when he noticed the edge of something tucked beneath the lining at the bottom. He lifted the fabric carefully and found a small envelope, unsealed. Inside were 3 American $100 bills. Viktor stared at the money. His mind raced through explanations. Perhaps it was a gift from a foreign delegation. Perhaps it was payment for freelance translation work. Perhaps it had been there for years, forgotten and irrelevant. But none of those explanations felt true. Soviet citizens did not keep American dollars hidden in their closets unless they had a reason to hide them. And the only reason that made sense, the only reason that fit the telegram and the code name and the growing suspicion that had been eating at him for days, was that Anna was being paid by the CIA. Viktor replaced the envelope exactly as he had found it and closed the box. He put it back in the closet and sat on the edge of the bed. His chest felt tight. His breathing was shallow. He heard the bathroom door open, heard Anna's footsteps approaching. She appeared in the doorway, a towel wrapped around her hair. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked. "You look pale." "I'm fine," Viktor said. "Just tired." She walked over and placed a hand on his forehead. "You don't have a fever. Maybe you should rest." He looked up at her. Her face was open, concerned, familiar. He wanted to ask her why. He wanted to know when it had started, how they had recruited her, what they had promised, but he said nothing. He simply nodded and lay back on the bed. Anna sat beside him, her hand resting on his chest. "You work too hard," she said softly. "You should take a few days off. We could visit your mother, maybe," Viktor said. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. "I'll make you some tea." After she left the room, Viktor stared at the ceiling. He thought about the telegram, the money, the years of lies. He thought about what he was supposed to do next. Protocol was clear. If he suspected his wife of espionage, he was required to report it immediately. The state would investigate. They would interrogate her. If she was guilty, she would be arrested, tried, and almost certainly executed. If she was innocent, the investigation would destroy her anyway. Suspicion alone was enough to ruin a life. But Viktor did not report it. Not that night, not the next day. Instead, he continued to watch, continued to search for proof that would either condemn her or absolve her. He went through her belongings when she was out. He followed her at a distance when she went to the market. He listened to her phone calls, trying to detect coded language or hidden meanings. And the more he looked, the more convinced he became that Anna was exactly what the telegram suggested, an American agent. Operating under deep cover, living a lie so complete that even her husband had been deceived. 3 weeks after he first saw the telegram, Viktor came home to find the apartment empty. There was no note, no explanation. Anna's clothes were gone. The small box in the closet had been removed. The photograph of his parents still sat on the side table, but the ceramic vase was missing. Viktor stood in the silent apartment and felt the last remnants of his old life disintegrate. He walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. The space where the box had been was empty, a pale rectangle on the wooden shelf marking where it had rested for years. He sat on the bed and stared at nothing. He did not cry. He did not rage. He simply sat in the growing darkness, feeling the weight of betrayal settle over him like a blanket made of lead. The next morning, Viktor went to his superior officer and reported everything. He brought the telegram. He described the money he had found. He explained his suspicions. His voice was calm, factual, devoid of emotion. He spoke like a professional delivering a briefing, because that was the only way he could speak without breaking. The officer listened without interruption. When Viktor finished, the man nodded slowly. "This will be investigated," he said. "You did the right thing by reporting it." Viktor nodded. "Go home. Take a few days. We'll contact you when we have more information." Viktor left the office and walked back to his empty apartment. He sat on the couch where he and Anna had watched television together, where she had leaned against his shoulder, where everything had seemed normal. He thought about the moment she had disappeared, the decision she must have made to leave without warning, without explanation. He wondered if she had felt anything at all, or if he had simply been part of the mission, a target to deceive, a problem to manage. The investigation began within hours. Viktor was not informed of the details, but he knew how these things worked. Teams would have been dispatched to search the apartment, to review Anna's work records, to interview her colleagues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Surveillance footage would be analyzed, phone records would be pulled, border crossings would be checked. The machinery of the state, once activated, was thorough and relentless. Viktor was told to stay away from his office. It was standard procedure when an officer's family member was under investigation. The possibility of collusion had to be eliminated. Viktor understood this. He had been on the other side of these investigations before, watching colleagues placed under temporary suspension while their loyalty was verified. He had always believed the system was just, that innocent people had nothing to fear. Now he sat alone in his apartment, suspended between two terrible possibilities: that his wife was a traitor, or that he had destroyed her for nothing. 4 days passed before they came for him. It was early morning, just after dawn. Viktor was drinking tea at the kitchen table when he heard the knock. He knew the sound. 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced, the knock of people who did not need permission to enter. He opened the door to find 2 men in dark suits. Neither smiled. Neither introduced themselves. "You need to come with us," one of them said. Viktor nodded. He put on his coat and followed them down the stairs to a black Volga waiting at the curb. The streets were nearly empty, just a few early workers trudging through the slush toward bus stops. No one looked at the car. No one wanted to. They drove to a building Viktor recognized. A gray structure in the northeast part of the city used by the Second Chief Directorate for interrogations and debriefings. He had been inside once before, years ago, observing an interview with a defector from the West. The building had no windows on the first 3 floors. The entrance was guarded by men who checked identification with mechanical precision. Viktor was led through a series of corridors painted institutional green. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Doors with small windows lined both sides of the hallway, each one closed, each one concealing whatever was happening inside. They stopped at a door near the end of the corridor. One of the men opened it and gestured for Viktor to enter. The room was small and bare. A metal table sat in the center with 2 chairs on opposite sides. A single light fixture hung from the ceiling. The walls were concrete, unadorned except for a mirror that Viktor knew was one-way glass. He had stood on the other side of that glass before, watching suspects squirm under questioning. Now he was the one being watched. He sat in the chair facing the mirror and waited. Time passed slowly. He counted the seconds in his head, an old habit from his training. After 17 minutes, the door opened and a man entered. Viktor recognized him immediately. Colonel Yuri Zhukov, head of counterintelligence for the Second Chief Directorate. They had met twice before at briefings. Zhukov was in his 50s, a career officer with a reputation for patience and precision. He did not employ theatrics or intimidation. He simply asked questions and waited for the truth to emerge. Zhukov sat down across from Viktor and placed a folder on the table. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he studied Viktor's face with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. "Major Petrov," Zhukov said finally, "thank you for coming." Viktor said nothing. He knew that every word he spoke would be analyzed, weighed, compared against what they already knew or suspected. "You reported concerns about your wife on April 9th, Zhukov continued. "You believed she might be involved in espionage activities on behalf of the United States. Yes. What led you to that conclusion?" Viktor had prepared for this question. He explained about the telegram, the code name Nightingale, the hidden money. He spoke clearly and without emotion, presenting the facts as he would in any intelligence briefing. Zhukov listened without interrupting, his expression unchanging. When Viktor finished, Zhukov opened the folder and removed several documents. He placed them on the table one by one. The first was a copy of the telegram. The second was a photograph of the $300 bills, each one labeled with an evidence number. The third was a typed transcript of phone calls made from Viktor's apartment over the past 6 months. "We have been monitoring your wife for some time," Zhukov said. "Not because we suspected her initially, but because her name appeared in connection with another investigation. A diplomat at the French embassy was found to be passing information to Western intelligence. Your wife translated for him on several occasions. We began routine surveillance to determine if there was any connection." Viktor's throat felt dry. "And the surveillance revealed certain anomalies. Your wife made regular visits to locations that had no apparent purpose. She would walk through Gorky Park at odd hours, always alone, always following the same route. She would stop at a bench near the pond, sit for exactly 10 minutes, then leave. On 3 separate occasions, we observed her placing something beneath the bench. When we retrieved the items, we found they were empty cigarette packs. Inside each pack was a piece of paper with a series of numbers. Zhukov paused, letting the information settle. Viktor felt as though he were watching the collapse of a building from the inside, seeing each support beam give way in sequence. The numbers were coordinates, Zhukov continued. Meeting locations, times. We began to assemble a pattern. Your wife was operating as a courier, passing information from sources within the Soviet government to CIA handlers. She used her position at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as cover. The translations were real, but they also gave her access to classified documents that she would photograph and pass along. Viktor stared at the documents on the table. He wanted to deny it, to insist there had been a mistake, but the evidence was methodical and damning. He thought about the evenings they had spent together, the quiet conversations, the ordinary intimacy of marriage. All of it had been layered over a foundation of lies. "How long?" Viktor asked. His voice sounded distant, as though it belonged to someone else. "We believe she was recruited in 1976, Zhukov said. Possibly during a cultural exchange program in Leningrad. We are still investigating the details, but it appears she has been active for at least 7 years. 7 years, Viktor calculated backward. They had been married for 14 years. That meant she had spent half their marriage deceiving him, half their life together living a lie so complete that he had never once suspected. "Where is she now?" Viktor asked. Zhukov closed the folder. "We don't know. She disappeared on April 7th, 2 days before you filed your report. We believe she was tipped off by someone within the ministry, possibly another agent. She did not attempt to leave through official channels. No border crossings, no flights, no trains. She simply vanished. Then she's still in the country. Possibly. Or she was exfiltrated through unofficial means. The Americans have networks we are still working to dismantle. It's possible she was moved through a series of safe houses and eventually taken across the border into Finland or Turkey. We are pursuing all leads." Viktor tried to imagine Anna moving through the shadows, guided by handlers he had never seen, protected by a network he had spent his career trying to expose. The irony was almost unbearable. "We need to ask you some questions," Zhukov said. "To determine the extent of your involvement, if any. I had no involvement. I believe you. But the process must be followed. You understand?" Viktor understood. He had conducted these interviews himself. He knew that innocence was not assumed, that loyalty had to be proven repeatedly, that even the most faithful servants of the state could fall under suspicion. He was now a security risk by association, a man whose wife had betrayed not only him but the entire Soviet system. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. Even if they eventually cleared him, the stain would remain. The interview lasted 6 hours. Zhukov asked about every detail of Viktor's life with Anna. When had they met? Who introduced them? What had they discussed? Where had they traveled? Had she ever asked questions about his work? Had she ever seemed interested in classified information? Had she exhibited any unusual behavior? Viktor answered every question as honestly as he could. He described the routines of their marriage, the small moments that had seemed unremarkable at the time, but now took on sinister significance. He admitted that Anna had occasionally asked about his work, but only in the casual way spouses did, wanting to know if he was stressed or tired. He said she had never pressed for details, never seemed overly curious about operations or personnel. But even as he spoke, Viktor realized how easily those same facts could be interpreted differently. A good operative would know not to press. A skilled agent would maintain the appearance of disinterest while filing away every scrap of information for later use. Anna had been living with an intelligence officer for 14 years. Even casual conversations at the dinner table could have provided valuable insights into Soviet military thinking, operational procedures, security protocols. When the interview finally ended, Zhukov stood and gestured toward the door. "You're free to go, Major. But you will remain on administrative leave pending the completion of our investigation. Do not attempt to leave Moscow. Do not discuss this matter with anyone. Report any contact from your wife immediately." Viktor nodded and left the room. He walked back through the green corridors, past the closed doors and watchful guards, out into the gray afternoon light. The same black Volga was waiting to take him home. He sat in the back seat and watched the city pass by, the familiar streets now feeling alien and hostile. When he arrived at his apartment, he found that it had been searched again. The evidence was subtle but unmistakable. Books were slightly out of place. Drawers were not quite closed all the way. Someone had been through every corner of his life, looking for anything that might connect him to Anna's activities. Viktor walked through the room slowly, taking inventory of what remained. Most of Anna's belongings were gone, removed as evidence or simply absent because she had taken them when she fled. The apartment felt hollow, like a stage set after the performance had ended. He stood in the bedroom and looked at the empty closet. The pale rectangle on the shelf where the box had been seemed to glow in the dim light. He thought about the $300 bills hidden beneath the lining, the small fortune that represented years of payments from foreign handlers. He wondered how many times Anna had opened that box, how many times she had looked at that money and thought about what it cost to earn it. The days that followed were suspended in a strange limbo. Viktor was not arrested, but he was not cleared either. He remained in his apartment, occasionally visited by investigators who asked more questions, sought more details, probed for inconsistencies. He cooperated fully, answering everything with the same flat precision. He had nothing to hide and nothing left to protect. Reports filtered back to him through official channels. The search for Anna had expanded. Informants were questioned. Known CIA contacts were placed under increased surveillance. A woman matching her description had been reported near the Finnish border, but by the time agents arrived, she was gone. Another sighting in Odessa proved to be false. The trail grew cold. Viktor spent his days reading old intelligence reports, trying to understand how he had missed the signs. He reviewed his memories like files, searching for the moment when he should have known. The conversation that should have raised alarm, the gesture that should have revealed the truth. But there was nothing. Anna had been perfect in her deception, or Viktor had been blind in his trust. Perhaps both were true. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table drinking vodka from a glass that had once been hers, he allowed himself to imagine her final hours in Moscow. He pictured her packing quickly, taking only what she needed, leaving behind everything that might slow her down. He imagined her walking through the city under cover of darkness, moving from one safe house to another, guided by people who had been waiting for this moment. He wondered if she had been afraid, or if she had felt relief at finally dropping the mask she had worn for so many years. He wondered if she had thought about him at all. The answer came 3 weeks later, delivered in an unmarked envelope slipped under his door while he slept. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief message written in Anna's handwriting. "Viktor, I know you cannot forgive me. I do not ask you to. But I want you to know that everything I felt for you was real. The mission was what brought us together, but what happened between us was mine. They told me to marry you, to stay close, to gather what I could. I did all of that, but I also loved you. I know you will not believe me. I know it changes nothing, but it is true. You were the only honest thing in a life built on lies. I am sorry. I am sorry for all of it, Anna." Viktor read the letter 3 times, then walked to the stove and set it on fire. He watched the paper curl and blacken, watched the words disappear into ash. When it was gone, he opened the window and let the wind carry the ashes away. The investigation concluded 2 months later. Colonel Zhukov summoned Viktor back to the Gray Building and delivered the findings in a conference room with 4 other officers present. Viktor was cleared of any involvement in Anna's activities. The evidence showed he had been deceived, not complicit. His loyalty to the state was not in question, but his career was over nonetheless. The recommendation was immediate retirement with full pension. It was framed as a generous gesture, a recognition of his years of service. Viktor understood it for what it was, an expulsion. The state could not afford to have an officer whose wife had defected continue in a position of trust. The damage was too great, the risk too high. He was a liability now, a reminder of how deeply the enemy could penetrate Soviet institutions. Viktor accepted the decision without protest. He signed the papers, turned in his credentials, and left the building for the last time. He walked to his car and drove home through streets that no longer felt like his. He was 42 years old, unmarried, unemployed, and alone. The apartment remained his, but he could not stay there. Every room held memories that had been poisoned by betrayal. He put in a request for reassignment to a smaller city, somewhere far from Moscow, somewhere no one knew his name or his story. The request was approved within a week. In September of 1983, Viktor moved to Pskov, a small city near the Estonian border. He took a job as a clerk in a municipal office, processing paperwork for construction permits. The work was meaningless, but it filled the hours. He lived in a one-room apartment above a bakery. He spoke to no one unless required by work. He became invisible, just another middle-aged man ground down by the weight of life in the Soviet Union. Anna was never found. The CIA never confirmed or denied her existence as an agent. The official records of her employment at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs were sealed. Her name disappeared from all public documents. It was as though she had never existed, as though the 14 years Viktor had spent with her were a fiction he had imagined. But Viktor knew she was real. He carried the weight of that knowledge every day. He thought about her when he woke in the morning and when he lay down at night. He thought about the telegram, the code name, the hidden money. He thought about the letters she had sent, the claim that her love had been real even when everything else was false. He did not know if he believed her. He suspected he never would. Years passed. The Soviet Union continued its slow decline, though few dared speak of it openly. Viktor watched from his small apartment as the world changed around him. He read newspapers and listened to radio broadcasts. He heard about Gorbachev's reforms, about glasnost and perestroika, about the cracks appearing in the system he had once served without question. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Viktor was 49 years old. He stood in the street and watched people celebrate, watched them tear down symbols of the state that had defined his entire life. He felt nothing. No joy, no sorrow, no sense of liberation or loss. He was a ghost moving through a world that no longer had a place for him. He continued working at the municipal office. The government changed, but paperwork remained. He processed permits under the new system just as he had under the old one. The bakery below his apartment changed owners. The streets were renamed. Statues came down. But Viktor's life remained the same, a flat line of existence stretching forward without meaning or purpose. He never remarried. He never formed close friendships. He existed in a kind of suspended isolation, a man who had learned too well that trust was a weakness and love was a weapon. He had believed in something once, in the mission and the cause and the woman who slept beside him. All of it had been stripped away, leaving only the emptiness where faith used to be. On March 17, 2003, exactly 20 years after he first read the telegram, Viktor died of a heart attack in his apartment. He was 61 years old. The body was discovered 2 days later by the landlord, who had noticed mail piling up by the door. There were no relatives to contact, no friends to notify. He was buried in a municipal cemetery on the outskirts of Pskov, in a grave marked only with a simple stone bearing his name and dates. Among his few possessions, investigators found a small wooden box tucked beneath his bed. Inside were documents from his years in the GRU, commendations he had never displayed, photographs of a life that seemed to belong to someone else. At the bottom of the box was a single photograph of a woman. No name was written on the back, no date, just a face, frozen in time, smiling at a camera held by someone who had loved her once, before the world taught him that love and lies were sometimes indistinguishable. The photograph was filed with the rest of his belongings and eventually discarded when the apartment was cleared for new tenants. Like everything else in Viktor Petrov's life, it disappeared without record, without memory, without anyone left to remember what it meant. If stories like this make you reflect on how fragile trust really was during those years, consider subscribing. There are many more Cold War stories that should never be forgotten. The files are still being opened. The truth is still emerging. And somewhere in those documents are the lives of people like Viktor, who served faithfully and were destroyed anyway. Not by the enemy, but by the realization that the enemy had been sleeping beside them all along.